There was a great question asked on an earlier video about a CFA study strategy, specifically if someone should read every single line in the CFA material. My answer to that is no, and we'll talk about it. I appreciate this type of thing though. If you have a question, it's likely that many others like you have the same question. If you could leave any of those questions in the comments down below to this video. I love doing these video reply topics, so I'd like to get a response out to you to anything that I think would make sense that a lot of other people could be wondering too. Again, this was a great one because it pertains to getting through the material during your first pass of the CFA curriculum and how to best learn the information in an effective way so that you'll be able to do quizzes effectively, blue box questions effectively, end of chapter questions effectively. But more importantly, when you come back and do your final review in the last 6 weeks or 30 days before the CFA exam, the information you reviewed 6 or 9 months ago is still relatively easily recalled in your mind. It is important that your first pass through all of the curriculum is really effective. And no, I certainly don't think that you should be reading every line item from the CFA books. The big theme here is going to be utilizing a test prep provider. This is how I studied for the CFA exams, and I know that thousands of other candidates out there like me have as well. If you are studying using only the CFA curriculum, either ebook or in physical copy, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying the tips in this video won't be as applicable to you, and you should probably get some information to this same question, because it still is an important question for you, from someone who studied the way that you're studying, that is with the CFA curriculum, so that you can most efficiently and effectively make your first pass through that material. But if you're someone who is utilizing a test prep provider, which I generally think is a good idea, then the best way to make your first pass, in my opinion, is with their video lessons and or study notes. They kind of work interchangeably. The reason that video lessons and study notes can be so effective in the CFA studying process is because they do a great job at scaling down the material into smaller chunks that are more digestible for the human brain, but also really ignore some of the minutia that is involved in the CFA curriculum that isn't likely to end up on one of the exams, or it's just going to be really small tidbits here and there scattered throughout an exam, maybe 4 questions or something, from a lot of the material that I would consider to be like supporting information of the core themes that the curriculum covers. The video lessons or study notes from my test prep provider are going to hone in on those core themes, which is where the vast majority of the questions on the CFA exams are going to be generated from. The potential downside to this is that every single point and almost every single word that is included in these video lessons or study notes is important information. So if you're watching some video lessons, especially if you have it at like 1.5 or 2.0 times speed, and you daze off for like 15 seconds and then focus back up and go back through the screen and follow along with the video again, it's likely that you missed some really important information just because these lessons and notes are condensed so tightly in order to get that huge amount of CFA curriculum down into a more digestible piece of information. So again, it's very efficient from a time perspective because you won't waste hours and hours and hours reading things that are likely not to fall on one of the CFA exams. But since they're so concentrated on things that are so important for the exams, if you miss any of it, you're likely to miss some important stuff. My understanding is that the way the majority of test prep providers make their video lessons, if they offer them, is just by doing a verbally read walkthrough of those study notes. So it really doesn't matter to me if you want to watch the video lesson and take your own notes or read through the study notes and take your own notes. Both of them, in most cases that I've seen, cover the exact same content. It's just presented in a different way. So however you are more comfortable learning, either by lecture through the video lesson or by reading through the study notes, go ahead and do that. Again, either medium is going to save you a ton of time over reading through all the CFA curriculum material. Personally, I'm not an especially fast reader, and I'm certainly not a strong reader when it comes to difficult content, like academic content that you need to be learning and internalizing as you go through it, which is exactly the type of content that the CFA curriculum covers. There were instances where I would forget my laptop or I would forget my study notes, so I would have to use the CFA curriculum ebooks just by going to their website. I would waste a half hour getting through 1 page or 2 pages of material sometimes because I was so slow in getting through that dense content. For anyone similar to me, there's certainly no way I could have passed these exams without utilizing a test prep provider to condense that information for me into a much shorter body of work, but also present it in a easier to understand way. It's much better taught. The CFA curriculum is not a teaching curriculum, it's more like an encyclopedia of information, whereas the study notes from a test prep provider are written in a way to teach you how to answer certain questions. If you've done a good job at effectively internalizing a lot of the information from the curriculum, either through the video lessons or study notes, or if you're reading the curriculum line by line, then you're going to be far more efficient at answering all the blue box questions from the CFA curriculum and the EOC end of chapter questions from the CFA curriculum, which I recommend every candidate do. And that's going to save you more and more time in the future. Because let's say if you did a chapter which was like 30 pages of content in the CFA books, or maybe 10 pages of study notes, if you actually learned all that information, you're going to be able to answer all or most of the blue box examples and not have to go back to the material after every question and relearn something. And you're going to be able to answer all the end of chapter questions and score an 80% or something like that. And you're going to have to spend much less time going back to the material to learn each question that you got wrong, why you got it wrong, and how to get it right. So it's going to save you a lot of time if you can learn efficiently on your first pass, which is why I think the test prep providers are such a valuable resource. You could argue that we actually need to give some credit to people who have gotten through the CFA program by only using the CFA curriculum material. And there are many people like that, because it just seems to me and to others that I've talked with like it's so much more difficult to study that way when you don't have all that content summarized for you in a more easy to understand and more easy to learn from form. If you're someone who maybe reads thousands of books and you're very good at quickly digesting very complicated material, then reading through the curriculum could be an okay solution for you. But I just can't see that being the best study strategy for 95% of candidates. Even though it's not efficient to study from the CFA curriculum line by line, I already mentioned it is a great idea to go back and do all the blue box examples that the CFA Institute puts in that curriculum and the EOC or end of chapter questions that they put in that curriculum. It's also very valuable to use those books as a reference or a resource to go back and learn on topics that seem really confusing to you. And that can be especially helpful when the test prep provider doesn't have a very thoughtful explanation of a certain concept put together. If you've already gone through a level or two using a test prep provider, you'll be all too familiar with this concept, but sometimes the test prep providers will miss very important parts of an explanation or skip one altogether because they forgot it, and you'll really be left scratching your head when you're trying to answer some of the practice questions either through their quizzes or EOCs or blue boxes. So the only way that you'll ever actually learn how to do a certain type of question in some cases is to go back to the CFA curriculum, the actual source. Maybe not the direct source, because much of the CFA curriculum is put together through other bodies of work that have been done in the past, but at least through the actual CFA textbooks, because they are extremely detailed, and you will get to the bottom of how a certain problem is solved if you spend enough time with those books. So even though they're not very efficient to learn with, they are very effective to learn with when you need them to be. Don't throw them away. The potential exception to this advice is with the ethics books. And again, if you've been through a level or two, you'll understand why this is. The test prep providers are just understandably not as well prepared to write practice questions or summarize the CFA Institute's information on ethical concepts than they are with other types of content. This is tough to explain, and it's just due to the nature of how the CFA Institute presents the ethics content to you or educates you on ethics and ethical decision making. It's not always black and white, it's not always straightforward, and that's why it can become very difficult for these third parties to compress or condense that information into a more digestible format and to make up their own questions based on it without kind of just taking one of the practice questions that the Institute has made themselves and adjusting a couple of the variables. I'm still not saying read every line in the CFA curriculum for the ethics books, but after you are presented with enough practice questions and have to go back to the source to figure out why the answer is the way it is, you probably will have read through almost every line in the ethics books, because ethics is just so odd. If someone wanted to argue that the most effective way to study for ethics is actually by reading every single line in the CFA curriculum, I might not push back on them so much. If you've gotten to this point in the video, it means you watched the whole thing, and I really appreciate that. One of the factors for the YouTube algorithm, along with likes and comments and subscribes, is that your view time as a percentage of the video is high or as a total amount of time is high. So thank you very much for watching the whole thing here. If you could also like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, I really appreciate those things. As always, thanks for watching.